Welcome back. It has been a month since Parkland. Have we done enough? Have we done too much? Today on the Suncoast, across Florida and around the nation, from Washington, D.C. to California, students, teachers, administrators weighed in as one teenager in Indiana said, "We are tired of thoughts and prayers. Do something, finally." We have done something here in Florida, at least the state legislature has, by passing the first gun control legislation in 30 years, raising the age to buy a long gun, a 3-day waiting period, mental health provisions, but no assault weapons ban. In Washington, the House voting today to fund more security at schools, and that's about it. Joining us for more is Bridget Ziegler, the chair of the Sarasota County School Board, Carol Resignio of the Brady Campaign to Prevent Gun Violence, Frank Alcock, political science professor at New College, and joining us by Skype is Ron Chapman, an attorney for the NRA. And Bridget, let me start with you. School districts have to opt in to the guardianship program that was passed by the state legislature. As you know, Sheriff Knight was on this broadcast last week, and he did express some frustration that the school board is not acting fast enough on his ideas to train former military and law enforcement types to be in the schools armed.
Right. So, well, one thing I'll say about the state school safety bill that was passed in Tallahassee, it does allow for flexibility. So that in the 67 counties, determining what that looks like. Our sheriff, we are tremendously fortunate to have a very proactive sheriff. I have a great relationship with him and I've talked to him extensively because he knew this was coming down and knew that we needed to act right away. So he has provided the school district and school board with some options. In addition, I know the superintendent in the beginning had mentioned some of the infrastructure, budgetary components that we are revising to harden our schools within year one. And now on March 22nd, we will have another executive session this next upcoming Tuesday to establish the 3 different options that are in the bill and which action we're going to be taking forward. So.
And Carol, let me ask you this. You know, Joe Gruters, the state representative, was here the other night. He voted for the state bill. And by doing that, he was basically putting his A rating with the NRA in jeopardy because he, after all, voted to raise the minimum age to buy a long gun. And he basically said that, look, both sides of this issue really have to give a little bit, and this is what was the best that can be done right now. Your response?
Well, my response would be that it's been a long time coming, and I still think they could have done a lot more. I would never say turn down money for mental health projects. I would never say turn down help or money for law enforcement, and I would certainly leave that to the school districts. But there are so many more things that could have been done. I'm not sure any of this involved gun reform.
Okay, and on the flip side of that, Ron Chapman, you are with a lawyer for the NRA, which is now suing the state of Florida for raising the minimum age to buy a long gun. You know, there's been so much emotion on this, and if you listen to the students and many of their parents, this is one thing that they said is the minimum that should be done.
Well, I understand that's what the students said, but the students and the parents aren't the arbiters of what the Constitution says. And the Second Amendment, says that person of the age of majority has rights under the Second Amendment. And I don't think Florida legislature can change that. So in this particular case, the NRA is basically taking the position that the ACLU should take. And that is that the legislature cannot arbitrarily change the age of majority when it comes to buying a long rifle. You have a constitutional right for that. You can change the age of drinking. You can change the age of driving. Those aren't constitutional rights. But the Second Amendment is a constitutional right, and you can't do that. Okay. One of the things a lot of people did, and this piece of legislation does, is it systematically reduces the rights of individuals. We can talk about some of the mental health provision. For example, you can do this ex parte notice if somebody has failing grades. I mean, I don't know that that's the criteria we should be using in order to investigate individuals.
And Ron, I want to dip more into that in our next segment, but Frank, I do want to get to you because this is at least the politics of it all here in Florida.
It is, and there's an interesting contrast with what we're seeing right now in the state of Florida vis-a-vis what we're seeing at in the federal government. I think at the federal government level there was a moment, an important moment, I think, where we needed the president to step up and exert some leadership, and it looked like he was going to do that, but the story ended the way that it typically ends. Contrast that with what we've seen, I think, on the part of the governor, even the response of Senator Rubio. I don't think that this bill goes far enough. I agree with Carol on a number of issues, but at the same time, I think the governor made a sincere attempt to move the ball forward and do something that was plausible. And I think, you know, Rubio's initial response, it was an honest attempt to at least open a conversation that hasn't been had in a long time.
Okay, we are just getting warmed up, and we'll have much more on 1 month after Parkland, right after we check the first alert weather. Stay with us. Welcome back. It has been a month since Parkland. What have we done? Have we done too much, too little? Joining us for more is Bridget Ziegler, the chair of the Sarasota County School Board, Karen Resigno of the Brady Campaign to Prevent Gun Violence, and Frank Alcock, political science professor at New College. And joining us by Skype is Ron Chapman, an attorney of at the NRA. And Ron, I want to start with something that you said earlier, where you basically said the Second Amendment is sacrosanct, and a lot of people do believe that, but I want you to respond to something that Justice Scalia, the man who has been so associated with the right to carry and bear arms, said after the court's decision. He says the Second Amendment is not unlimited. It is not a right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever in any manner whatsoever and for whatever purpose. Your response?
Well, I agree with that, but what he's talking mostly is concealed weapons. And the Second Amendment isn't a guarantee to be able to carry a concealed weapon. But we're talking about long guns, and we're talking about making a change. There's no fundamental difference. There have been 156 mass shootings classified as more than 4 shootings at a time since 2009. Only one of those was committed by somebody under the age of 21 buying a legal firearm. So changing this, arbitrarily changing it to attack the Second Amendment, gains you nothing, but it sacrifices a lot. You walk down the slippery slope of changing something without having any type of state action necessary to accomplish what you want to accomplish.
All right, Ron, let me ask you something, because while we were in the commercial break, one of our loyal viewers phoned in and wanted me to ask you, Ron, why not change the Second Amendment? After all, it's an amendment to the Constitution.
Well, you could change the Second Amendment if you had a constitutional convention, and you would need 60% of all states to ratify that. I highly doubt that that's going to happen. The state of Florida can't change the Second Amendment. It's part of the Constitution. You have a political science professor there that could probably address that a little more detail than I can, but the Second Amendment isn't something that's going to change, not in my lifetime.
All right, let's talk a little bit about what the U.S. Congress did do today. The House of Representatives, specifically in Bridget, what they're talking about is giving local school districts more money for security. I would imagine you appreciate that, but is that enough?
Well, I think all of these in isolation aren't enough. I don't think anyone around, depending on what, despite whatever your views are on guns, Second Amendment rights, et cetera, and I'm only here to talk about the school safety component, but it's multifaceted. There's a mental health component, there is the infrastructure around school safety, and then there's the law enforcement component as to keeping schools safe. So in isolation, none work, but yes, they do cost money. What I'm very impressed with is in Sarasota County, while prior to going to Tallahassee, we did convene and have an executive session to discuss what options we were thinking and what we are currently doing to quickly move into action. And what I think in the past, even though we know Tallahassee worked very quickly, and I'm very thankful for that, same with what's happening up in Congress, the reality is we need to locally figure out as a school district what's going to work best for our students, and we are taking those measures
because
right now.
Sheriff Knight told us today, even if you wanted more school resource officers in every school, he does not have them, and he does not have the budget to provide them.
Right, and I think, again, I think all of these items are absolutely, and I appreciate Sheriff Knight's candidness and his proactiveness, because he is a subject matter expert in this area, and I defer to him for those areas of what's going to be the right fit, what's the right balance, and also he has the insight to help us as far as what's going to have what's going to benefit the schools without breaking quote unquote the bank. So that's something we have to look at. But there are longer term discussions that we need to be having as far as the culture in our schools and allowing certain elements to go too far that I look forward to having us talk.
Carol, there are a lot of longer-term discussions that we need to be having. I know that you like some of the provisions in the state law that was signed into effect by Governor Scott. Congress has done nothing really to date. In a perfect world, and I know you're going to say ban assault weapons and large capacity magazines, but for the Brady campaign, is that what it is all about?
No, and it is something that the Brady campaign believes in nationally and locally, but I would say the biggest thing would be universal background checks.
Why?
I don't know
Because
if people realize how many times a gun is purchased from the back of a truck or handed from father to son. There's a proliferation of guns on our streets, in our homes, and in our schools that doesn't have to happen if we just have sensible gun laws. That's one of the things that Brady is interested in. It's named after Jim Brady, who, as you know, was shot during the attempt on Ronald Reagan's life. I would say that equally important is getting rid of what Brady calls the bad apple dealers. The dealers who are selling the guns, and that's actually not, most stores aren't doing that. Go after them.
Right.
Go after some of the educational projects.
Frank, we have an interesting distinction here in terms of what's happened in Florida and what is not happening in Congress. In both cases, you have a Republican legislature and a Republican chief executive, but with two different approaches here. You know, Florida did something. Governor Rick Scott signed something, and it seems like it is a non-starter in Washington. How do you explain the difference in the politics?
Governor Scott chose to step up and provide cover for...
But it wasn't just Rick Scott. I mean, it was Speaker Corcoran, it was Bill Galvano, it was a lot of people.
Well, Galvano was speaking out as well, but a number of prominent Republicans provided cover for others. When you have notable leaders in your party step up and say it's time to do something, that provides cover and allows some of the other more fearful legislators to vote their conscience. That has not happened at the federal level. It looked as if the president took a very bold stance in a meeting a couple of weeks ago, but he's totally folded and caved, and that's the big difference.
Ron, let me ask you about that, because the president in that meeting in the cabinet room with a lot of legislators from Florida, from around the country, he told members of Congress, don't be afraid of the NRA. He's not afraid of the NRA. He also suggested raising the minimum age to buy a long gun. And then just this week, he seemed to do a 180 on that. You had a lot of young people out there today saying all sorts of things about the NRA, specifically that the NRA is an impediment to anything getting done in Congress. And I want to give you a chance to respond to that.
Well, I don't think it's the NRA that's an impediment to things getting done in Congress. I think the president is a provocative president. He raised a number of issues and he started the national dialogue. Now, I think people in Congress have to step up and do the things that they have to do to solve this problem. But this problem is mostly solved at the mental health level. Understand that most of these mass shootings are either done people doing something in the heat of passion, killing a loved one, killing parents, things like that, or they're doing it because of a mental health issue and they're coming into a school and these other types of places. So we need to address the mental health. I think what the president did was provocative to challenge Congress and say, don't be afraid of the NRA. The NRA shouldn't be afraid of. The NRA is not opposed to having good background checks. The NRA is not opposed to enforcing the laws that we have. The NRA isn't opposed to getting bad dealers out of the business of selling guns to people they shouldn't sell to. The NRA supports those kinds of things. What the NRA is opposed to is changing the Second Amendment to arbitrarily going after people that are between the ages of 18 and 21. There's no rhyme or reason to do that other than all politics are local. In the state of Florida, because this last mass shooting in Parkland was in the state of Florida, they all run to a knee-jerk reaction and let's do something.
But Ron, let me ask you this, because public opinion poll after public opinion poll shows that 65 to 70% of Americans want assault weapons banned from sales, and also that large capacity magazines should not be sold. So when people look at that high percentages, and we only have less than a minute left, they're saying that the one unmovable force here is the NRA.
Well, that's not true, because assault weapons are banned in the United States. People misclassify an AR-15 as an assault weapon. It's not an assault weapon. So we have to look at classification, but assault weapons have been banned in the United States for years.
All right, well, you know, there are a lot of smart people on both sides of this. I could imagine that they could come together and get an accurate definition of what is an assault weapon or a semi-automatic and so forth, but we have to take a quick break, and we'll be back for final thoughts in a moment. And our guests join us right now for final thoughts. And Frank, I'll start with you, because around the country there are a lot of things that students are saying, and their parents and their teachers, are about minimum requirements that they want to see in every school. And one of them is metal detectors.
I think that they would feel safer if you had metal detectors. I'm not sure what the cost of putting those in all schools is, but I think that that's one that we might even see some traction on that. We might see that get somewhere. What I've heard, though, I think from the students again and again, it's about, is there anything that we can do to keep weapons out of the hands of people shouldn't have them, and that's the universal background checks, and I think we can be doing things that we're not doing. The assault weapons ban, but again, it just comes back to, is there anything that we can do to lessen the lethality of these weapons? Even if there was just 16 people that died as opposed to 17, that's one life, and that would be worth it. And I think the other thing that you're seeing in the demands is that given that there are signals of violence, is there anything that we can do to take weapons out of the hands of people that shouldn't have them after they already do?
Bridget, you know, a lot of people have been in awe of these students, not only from Sarasota, from Parkland, from across the country, but what would you say to those folks out there who are taking aim at these students and saying that they're being put up by forces politically to do these things, and that they should basically be students, and unless they're of voting age, they really don't have a say right now?
Well, I think that people are going to say whatever they're going to say, and honestly, I think I would say in Sarasota County and across the nation, this is an opportunity, and the students' perspective, whether you agree politically with them or not, are a very valuable point of view, because they're living this life every single day. So when we're trying to come up with solutions, we need their eyes and ears from a perspective standpoint of what's going to work, but also to be aware to keep things from happening. So they are an important part of this equation.
Carol, I'm going to ask you just to be brief here, but what we just saw in that special election in Pennsylvania is that the Democrat could win in a very deeply red district, but he did commercials with AR-15s.
Quite frankly, I did not know he did commercials with
Yes.
AR-15s. I know that he leaned more Republican in many ways than Democratic. I just want to say that this is such a bigger issue than this one horrific school shooting. And as much as I appreciate the fact that we need to do things to the schools, I think we need to remember that Pulse and South Sutherland and Vegas were not in schools.
And
it's
Ron,
a bigger issue.
Ron, we have about 45 seconds left, but I wanted to give you the last word here. And the question that always occurs to me is, we're working on making our schools safer, but what happens when these kids get out of school and go to the movies? And what happens when they go to the concerts? You're not going to have metal detectors at every one of these locations, or are you?
Well, you're not going to have metal detectors there, and that's why taking guns away from law-abiding citizens doesn't do anything to solve your problem, and actually increases your problem. The NRA is in favor of enforcing existing laws. Many times the existing laws are not enforced. We can do that. We can enhance background checks. And we can make sure that people that shouldn't have guns don't have guns. But taking guns away from law-abiding citizens in any form or fashion does nothing but increase your chances of having a negative result.
Okay, and we have to leave it there. We want to thank our guests, Bridget Ziegler, the chair of the Sarasota County School Board, Karen Rosigno of the Brady Campaign to Prevent Gun Violence, Frank Alcock, political science professor at New College, and joining us by Skype, Ron Chapman, an attorney for the NRA.